Everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to another live stream. We have got a lot to talk about tonight, folks. Going to talk about the markets. We're going to get into some of the geopolitical updates because, boy, things are happening quick. But before we get into all of that, I want to talk about something that is potentially even more important than those things. And I want to address some comments I've gotten on some recent videos. So a few users, a few viewers out there seem to think that the tone on the channel has become a little bit too doom and gloom, a little too emphatic. And let me just say, first of all, this is at its heart a gold and silver stacking channel. That's how this all got started, and that is what this channel is about at its core. Believe it or not, I know the tone of these live streams may be a little bit, less than sunny lately, but that's just what's going on in the world. And if you go back, believe it or not, on the channel and you watch, there's lots of videos about stacking, information for people who are interested in investing in physical precious metals and that sort of thing. But we will be doing more content like that on the channel. But with the pace of developments, which are all ultimately tied to the price of the precious metals, these geopolitical events occurring at such a pace, I just feel like that is the subject matter that is most pertinent to cover at the moment. And yeah, we got to learn in the chat here saying, seems like we aren't done suffering yet, IMO. And okay, so on that note, I want to point out that there are some things that we really need to be on the lookout for here, folks, because we are on the verge potentially of a major regional conflict in the Middle East. We are on the verge of a major financial crisis here in the U.S. In fact, I think we're in the midst of it. But there are some other things out there that might even be more pertinent. We've got this terror warning from the FBI, Homeland Security issuing these warnings. We've got ourselves in this situation right now where we're not exactly making a lot of friends around the world. We've emphatically backed up Israel, and, regardless of how you feel about that personally, that is creating a lot of anti-American sentiment around the world right now. And we also happen to be in this situation where we've had this porous southern border. And, I'm not one to think we need to lock down the border for all time. And, I don't think that controlling who flows over an imaginary line in the sand is necessarily the best policy. Immigration is something that this country was built on in the 19th century. We had some of the biggest periods of American economic growth, and a lot of that had to do with the labor of immigrants. But what we've done here is we've created these failed drug war policies that have created very negative situations in a lot of these South and Central American countries. We've interfered in their democratic processes, so we've made it very unpleasant down there. And at the same time, we are leaving this porous southern border. So a lot of people have crossed into this country. And look, if you're going to have those policies where you destabilize regions and you create these flows of migrants and things, you probably at least should keep an eye on that border. And that's not something we've done. So I think we've put ourselves into a very precarious situation here. I mean, who knows how many people total have come across the border outside of official channels, let us say. And, even if the vast majority of those people are harmless, there's a real possibility that some agents of less than friendly nations, let's say, have managed to work their way in here. So, if the tone seems a little doom and gloom, if it seems a little too emphatic, that is because the situation is becoming more dire by the day. And, perhaps I kind of have that disposition to begin with, but I think that, events around the world kind of warrant this. So I just wanted to say that, sorry if the tone's a little doom and gloom, but there's a lot of very serious stuff going on around the world. And I think that a trap that a lot of people fall into is this normalcy bias. I mean, I don't know about you. I'd like to know from you, actually, with your interactions with, friends and family and, just members of the general public. Hey, Constitutional Stacker, thanks for that, by the way. How many of them are really paying attention to what's going on? How many of them do you think have a good grasp on some of the risks that are manifesting themselves in the world right now? How many people are aware of the petrodollar and the fact that Xi Jinping is trying to get the Gulf nations to sell their oil for yuan? How many people out there, seriously consider the idea that there probably are sleeper cells in the United States from some of these oppositional countries, and they're probably just biding their time? And with events going the way they are, we may very well be reaching a point where some very negative elements here are activated, or perhaps there's also the stage set for potential FF attacks, if you know what that acronym stands for. So do me a favor, put a 1 in the chat if you think that the general trend is normalcy bias and that folks just kind of are disregarding these threats that we're facing. Put a 2 if you have noticed that people are paying attention more. I do think that people are kind of waking up a little bit, but still, the disregard for some of these, potentially negative events, I think, is still pretty strong in the general population. By the way, I did mention this is a gold and silver stacking channel, which, I think gold and silver stacking is a very important element of preparedness because, should there be some kind of a significantly negative event, whether it be the spiking price of oil or something worse here domestically, these financial markets are very fragile, and I think it's important to have hard assets. If you want to buy some gold and silver, make sure you check out today's video sponsor, sdbullion.com. Right now, new customers can get gold or silver at spot by visiting sdbullion.com/new. Now, with that being said, let's get right into the doom and gloom, folks, because there's plenty of it out there. So, I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but really we do need to pay attention to what's going on here. So, very interesting today, we actually saw the 10-year yield declining significantly. So, someone was getting out there and buying a lot of this U.S. debt, driving rates down significantly, 2.5% down in one day. That's a big move. The consensus here seems to be that based on Jerome Powell's speech following the FOMC meeting yesterday, that a Fed pause is in effect. I mean, he certainly left the door open for hikes. He didn't rule them out because I think that would be a bit too much at this point. But with Powell, you got to kind of really read between the lines. And one thing he did say was that he thought that the risk of over tightening versus the risk of higher inflation now are better in balance. And so he, kind of hinting there that we may have seen the final Fed rate hike. But, if the Fed hikes another 25 basis points or not, I don't think that that is ultimately going to be the make or break it decision here for the Fed. Really, they're just kind of in a, damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of a scenario. And I don't think it's that things are balanced. I just think it's that, inflation's going to run out of control and the Fed can't really hike anymore because the economy is on the verge of a major crisis. And if we're heading to war, probably we may even see rate cuts. But the stock market rallying today, again, investors seeming to think that the Fed may be reaching a moment where they pivot here or pause. Metals slightly under pressure, and again, I would just view this as a significant buying opportunity for both gold and especially silver. I mean, silver is still so cheap. You've got gold knocking on all-time highs. It's just under $2,000. It's like $100 away from all-time highs, and yet silver still at less than 50% of its 2011 nominal highs, and also its 1980 nominal highs. So think about how cheap silver is right now. Now, let's get into what I think is really very pertinent here. This is the geopolitical developments. Here's a story that should cause concern. Again, further signs that we are headed towards a regional conflict. Yeah, someone in the chat there, Christmas Gaming Channel, says $18 Big Mac meal, silver price should be above $100. Yes, absolutely. I talked about that yesterday, how Big Mac meals now are selling for $18 in certain places in Connecticut. And it's pretty crazy. What was a Big Mac in 1980? I wonder if anybody knows. Put it in the chat. But a lot less than $18, and yet silver is cheaper than it was in 1980. So think about that. Think about how cheap the precious metals are. And people say that that means that, you shouldn't get silver because it's performed terribly. Well, I mean, it certainly underperformed a lot of other things up until this point, but to me, that's indicative of opportunity. I guess I'm kind of a contrarian at heart. Now, let's get into this story from the Wall Street Journal here. Russia's Wagner Group, or Wagner Group? Can't believe I don't know how to pronounce that now suddenly. But these folks plan to send air defenses to Hezbollah, U.S. says. So Hezbollah, the Lebanese militant group that operates in Lebanon and Syria, uh, there's a lot of speculation that they may open a second front in this war that Israel is currently fighting. Hezbollah, a much better armed, much better trained, much more formidably equipped military organization than Hamas. This could be a real problem for the IDF, and especially if they get this Russian SA-22 air defense system that uses anti-aircraft missiles and air defense guns. Now, again, I'm not a military guy, so I'm not too up on all the hardware, but I do understand that Russian anti-aircraft systems are fairly efficient, and this could pose a real problem. I don't know about that SA-22 specifically, but just another weapon in the arsenal of this Hezbollah group. And if this northern front pops off here, this could be the thing that sends the price of oil ultimately sky high, soaring to $150, $300, who knows? Because if Hezbollah gets involved, the likelihood of a broader conflict involving Iran, it's a real problem, rises dramatically. And it's not just that U.S. officials here are warning that this system may fall into the hands of Hezbollah. And of course, think about it. If Russia is supplying weapons to Hezbollah, think about the broader geopolitical implications here. We already know Iran is building drones, significant amounts of drones for Russia's war in Ukraine. So Russia and Iran are much more closer. They're moving much closer militarily, and they are now swapping ordnance. So again, the lines being drawn here between the camps, and not a good sign if they are getting Russian weapons. That could have all sorts of implications, especially if it's used on, let's say, U.S. aircraft, which we know could be operating in the region, because we have the USS Gerald Ford operating in the Mediterranean there. And then also we've got the Dwight Eisenhower, which is about to transit. Actually, we've got the story pulled up here. The Mediterranean on its way to the Persian Gulf. Now, this is very notable. The Dwight Eisenhower is in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's en route to the Middle East. It's actually headed to the Persian Gulf. Now, I said that the Eisenhower would be transiting the Suez Canal in a recent video. I'm just speculating because they were in the Mediterranean, and I thought, well, that's the shortest way to the Persian Gulf. And I had a few people in the comments tell me that aircraft carriers couldn't use the Suez Canal, but according to this report from USNI News, that's exactly what's happening. The Dwight D. Eisenhower, so this is the second carrier strike group here, will be sailing through the Suez Canal this weekend and chop into U.S. Fifth Fleet. So they're going to be operating in the Persian Gulf there. And of course, if you look at a map, the Persian Gulf, right next to Persia, aka Iran. So yeah, they got the Strait of Hormuz there, and that is a potential hotspot. And of course, it's not just the weapons that Hezbollah is getting, the SA-22 anti-aircraft system. You've also got some of these folks like Iran, some of their militaries operating with hypersonic missiles. They've got hypersonic ballistic missiles that they've been touting and demonstrating. You've got the Russians operating MiG-31s over the Black Sea armed with hypersonic missiles. So you've got all these U.S. ships there, a huge flotilla of U.S. Navy ships. You've got some very advanced weaponry on the other side as well. And you can see how things are shaping up here to perhaps not be de-escalating. Hopefully cooler heads will prevail, but again, I just call them as I see them. This doesn't look like signs of de-escalation. Now, at the same time that Russian weapons are being handed over, potentially, according to U.S. defense officials, to Hezbollah, you have got a significant, this is from today, 5 hours ago from Reuters, significant escalation on the border there. Hezbollah and Israel exchange fire as violence spikes at Lebanese border. Now, back in August, so before any of this really kicked off, the Israelis had threatened that they would, I think the quote was, return Lebanon to the Stone Age should Hezbollah get involved in any conflict. So those are pretty, pretty significant escalatory language there, saying they'll return them to the Stone Age. But now it's looking much more like Hezbollah may indeed open this northern front. According to this report, Lebanon Hezbollah said on Thursday it mounted multiple strikes on Israeli army positions, including its first use of explosive drones. And Israel launched airstrikes on southern Lebanon in a sharp escalation of violence. The Israeli army said it responded to launches from Lebanon towards Israel with airstrikes on Hezbollah targets, along with tank and artillery fire. So that sounds like a pretty big escalation to me. They claimed to have launched 19 simultaneous strikes on Israeli army positions in Israel using guided missiles, artillery, and other weapons. And so, it's a good example of how this group is a lot more heavily armed than they were in previous conflicts. Last time that Hezbollah and Israel fought a war was in 2006, and they have come a long way from then in terms of their capabilities. And, that's why we've got 2 aircraft carriers over there. It's not for Hamas. Israel can probably deal with Hamas on its own. It's the hundreds of thousands of Shiite militia fighters that surround it. You've got Yemen now, of course, launching ballistic missiles. And by the way, the surrounding Arab nations are not all so keen on that. Yemen has to fire these ballistic missiles over Saudi territory. You've got U.S. air defense systems operating in Saudi Arabia. There's obvious problems with having the Houthis, I think I'm saying that right now, is corrected in my pronunciation by a few people, the Houthis in Yemen launching missiles going over Saudi airspace. So, a lot of potential for, let's call it, major escalations here, and that should be very concerning. And I don't know that people are really paying attention to this. I mean, how much can you really do to prepare for this sort of thing? Well, go fill up your gas tanks, maybe get a nice bicycle and get that serviced, because if the price of oil goes to $150, $200 a barrel, the price of gas, well, it's going to go very high. And you might see things like price controls, shortages. These are things that you need to consider. It does behoove us, I think, to have hard assets, gold and silver, in our possession, but obviously there's more to preparedness than just that. And the reason I mention that on this channel is, first of all, these are things that I think about, and that's a lot of what has to do with this channel is, what's going through my mind and my thoughts about these things. But I know that this audience, you're somebody out there watching who at least takes, hard assets seriously. You likely are quite aware of many of the threats and problems that we're facing. And I think that those with a preparedness mindset tend to gravitate to gold and silver. So I'm hoping that this information is of interest to all of you. Yeah, Tony Neville says football is on, no one cares. And that's a sad commentary on how our society has become obsessed with these, diversions. And there's nothing wrong with sports or football. I mean, I don't watch football personally, but, there are some athletic type events that I find of moderate interest, but people's obsession with them, that and, the TikTok and social media and just the bread and circuses basically is what everybody is fixated on, while a conflict which has the potential to change our standard of living and our way of life. And, the kinetic aspect of this even could visit us at home very easily. There are many government officials at the moment who are warning of exactly that from the FBI and Homeland Security. So, while it's fine to have some balance in your life, I think now is really a time to be emphasizing preparedness. The situation is significantly more dire than it has been at any time in my memory. But hey, Greg says silver seems to have gone stagnant. Well, yeah, that's a sign, I think, that people aren't paying attention. It's also very interesting that the price of crude oil is still down around what, like 82, 83 bucks, something like that. I think it caught a slight bid today, but it does not seem like investors are really factoring in the potential risks here. But that's fine if the market is getting something wrong. Yeah, crude oil 82.50 right now. Then to me, that is just an opportunity, and I like to buy things when they are cheap personally. So I'm going to keep stacking. I also, I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago, kind of before all this kicked off, that I had lightened up some of my positions in terms of energy stocks like oil producers and energy producers, and I have reaccumulated those on the slight pullback we've seen in the price of crude oil because, of course, that was before this whole situation began to play out, and I think that I don't know. Markets just are not appreciating the amount of risk here for crude oil. Something like 20% of global oil production flows through the Strait of Hormuz, which I believe is 21 miles wide, something like that. Not a very big spot for all of these giant tankers to be going through, and there's a lot of military assets in that region, folks, and it wouldn't be the first time that that area has become very contentious. So, if that shuts down, it doesn't even help for the Saudis, for example. Like, let's say the price of oil spikes up, it doesn't help for them to increase their production if the Strait of Hormuz is shut down because it can't reach global markets. So, these are things we need to be aware of. And, when is this going to happen? Could it be tomorrow? Could it be the next day? Could it be next month, next year? I'm not sure. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but I think, could be sooner rather than later. If you ask Neil Howe, the author of The Fourth Turning is Here, I covered his older book, The Fourth Turning, in a recent video, and a few people kind of recommended that book to me. It just came out a month or two ago. I'm kind of reading through it at the moment, just getting started on it. But he says that it'll be sometime in the next decade. But again, that doesn't mean it's going to be 10 years from now. It means sometime over the next 10 years. So things are getting pretty hot, if you ask me. And I think we at least should be prepared for the worst, hope for the best and prepare for the worst, as they say. Now, what else is guaranteed? Yeah, hey, by the way, we've got 214 folks in the live stream. Huge. Thank you for joining. Please smash that like button if you don't mind. Someone asked, what about platinum? Yeah, platinum's a cool metal. I like platinum. Here's a platinum U.S. Eagle. I do have some more news to cover here, but I'll comment on platinum because people are asking here. I think that platinum is undervalued. I mean, if you look at a chart of the platinum price to the gold price or even the silver price, it is undervalued. It doesn't have the history as a monetary metal that gold and silver do, but that a lot of that has to do with the fact that it wasn't really refined in any quantity until like the 18th century. So it's a much more recent precious metal. I will tell you this: there's not very much of it. There is not very much of this stuff around. It is a very scarce metal. If you look at the CME Group warehouse numbers, they've got like millions of ounces of gold and silver. They've got, I think, a couple 100,000 ounces of platinum. So it's a bit more speculative, I think, than gold and silver. Silver is still my number one favorite asset of all time, but think about back in 2008, it took about 2 ounces of gold to buy an ounce of platinum, and now that ratio has reversed. I do think platinum is cheap. I like it. Again, it's a little more speculative, but something I have for sure. Okay, so let's get back to the news here. U.S. plans $425 million Ukraine weapons aid announcement. Okay, so for all the uncertainty out there, folks, all the uncertainty out there, one thing that we can be sure of is there's going to be a lot of money borrowed and spent. And I think that maybe that had something to do with why we saw the interest rate on the 10-year yield or the 10-year bond falling today. There will be a lot of liquidity pushed into these markets because of all this money that's going to be spent on this war. But ultimately, I think that this war will drive rates much higher because of the inflation that they unleash. And that's why I think that this pullback in the rate for the 10-year bond is very likely just a temporary phenomenon. Listen, you got the 10-year yield falling today. And what did the Treasury just tell us? They just told us that they borrowed $1 trillion, not $1 million. This is like Austin Powers, $1 million. No, they borrowed $1 trillion last quarter. And then this quarter and next quarter, they're going to borrow another 1.5 trillion, and yet you're seeing the yield falling. I mean, there's going to be an enormous supply of treasuries sold onto the market. So I think that we are going to see 5% and higher on the 10-year yield ultimately here. There might be some fluctuations in the meantime, but that will ultimately affect everything from, your mortgage rate to your credit card interest rate and everything in between. So that's not going to be particularly good. But yeah, $425 million Ukraine weapons announcement. I mean, I guess they still have to wait to pass the $100 billion that Biden requested for Israel and Ukraine. But this package will include, let's see, what are they spending hundreds of millions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money on? Laser guided munitions to shoot down Russian drones, $300 million worth of them. And then the remainder, what's that going to be? $125 million worth of weapons pledges. So, yeah, more surface to air missiles, air defense. That stuff I think is a very expensive way to deal with these munitions. I mean, they're taking some of these interceptor missiles, like $500,000 missiles, and shooting down a $600 rocket with it. How long can you do that? Of course, I suppose we got the world reserve currency, so we can print up as much money as we want. And hey, it'll probably even make our GDP go higher, right? You wonder why the GDP is up 4.9%. Well, if you want a clue as to what the GDP is coming from, it's not from building infrastructure for you or anything you can use. No, it's a bunch of stuff that's going to get blown up on the other side of the planet. So if you think that's good for the economy, well, I have a bridge to sell you. But yeah, you might see some short-term benefits from that. Of course, the ultimate price is going to be a massively devalued dollar and probably the loss of the world reserve currency status. I mean, really, how high do you think this number can go before nobody wants the debt anymore? I mean, already the rest of the world is charging us almost 5% because of how abusive we have been towards the privilege of having the world reserve currency. But this number is going to absolutely explode here, folks. For all the uncertainty, that is one thing that is guaranteed. So, while people are out there watching football and, rolling their eyes at you if you bring any of this stuff up, get prepared. Take advantage of the fact that you can still get an ounce of silver for under 25 bucks. And don't just stack silver. People always say, oh, you can't eat gold and silver. Like, well, okay, that's fine. Stack some food too. You can't put $2,000 worth of rice in your pocket either. So there's something to be said for both things, I think. But go out and stack up some food too. You can get some of the good, tasty Mountain House stuff. Find some sales on that. You can go down to Walmart and buy a 20-pound bag of rice for, I don't know what it is now, like 20 bucks. That can be stacked away for a rainy day, and just taking care of all those essentials. Think about this. The folks in Israel on October 7th, they didn't think that day that a bunch of Hamas terrorists were going to start pouring out of the sky in paragliders, and yet that's what happened to them, and a lot of them probably were taken completely by surprise by that event. And you don't want to be in that boat. Some of them were a little more prepared than others, and I think we're prepared to fight back. But you need security in place. You need these things in place. What if your water was to get shut off tomorrow? Do you know where you can get water except for the spigot in your house? If the water pressure dropped, do you know where you could get water for, more than a couple of days? Do you have food in place? What if the lights go out? Do you have a communications plan to get in touch with people that you need to get in touch with? Think about these things. And listen, I know, not everybody can be out on a off-grid, remote homestead, but there are small things you can do. And, just in terms of your daily life, just situational awareness, just paying attention when you're out in crowded public places. That's something we should all be practicing right now. It doesn't cost anything, and it's a good habit to get into. And, that might sound paranoid. People will say, oh, American Rambo, when I say stuff like this in the comments. And like, look, I'm not trying to be a Rambo. I'm just saying pay attention to what's going on around you. It's not like there aren't ample warning signs out there that there are problems. And I just noticed this, the national debt. It just crossed, what is this, 33 $0.692 trillion. This is the millions placed there, and it's like as I'm talking, we're ticking up by millions. We just crossed this $600 million line, and it's crazy that as we're having this conversation, so much money is being borrowed from the future and spent into the now. Isn't that's so wild? Um, the pace at which the debt is being racked up, especially when you keep in mind that the first $1 trillion took something like $200 to ring up, or 200 years to ring up. Sorry, it's late, folks. Bear with me here. But yeah, so $425 million of weapons for Ukraine. More of what we can expect moving forward. Keep an eye out, folks. Keep your head on a swivel. Be prepared for anything right now, and just focus on getting prepared. And not to the point of not enjoying life. Enjoy the good times. These are still the good times, regardless of how doom and gloom your local YouTuber is waxing lately. But seriously, do what you can to get prepared now. It's like I think I've heard the 100 to 1 rule. Things that you can do now will take 100 times more energy to do after all of the things that we take for granted are no longer available, should that day come. It's not guaranteed, of course. Maybe everything will remain normal indefinitely. Uh, but, that's just not how history has typically played out. I mean, I'm sorry I laugh when I say that, but the idea of history just standing still and we're in some normal time, and this is how a lot of people think. And this is what happens when you have kind of an empire in terminal decay. People become decadent. They become accustomed to the good times, and I think that we may be on the verge of getting a rude awakening, unfortunately, and hopefully that doesn't happen. But if it does, you want to be prepared just in case. And if nothing happens, then you will be better for it anyway. So leave me a comment down below to let me know what you think of all of this. Stay safe and happy stacking, everybody, and I will catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker, out.